Good day coders, in this video I want to show you how Angular has made it simple to implement two-way binding, right? So I'll first show you like the older method and this newer way of doing it, right? So previously what you would do is in here we've got a counter component, right? And then we've got this parent component that we're going to use, which is just our dashboard, right? So in the counter component, previously you'd need to like have like an input. So this would be like your input, right? And then this is gonna be your count. Maybe I'll just initialize it as 0. I'll add like an output, right? Which is just output change, right? So this is very important, the naming, right? So it should be the name, right? And just add this change, right? And then we have like an event emitter. Okay, then in our increment, we're just gonna basically increment our counter and then emit that value. And then the same thing applies here, right? We'll just basically then, let me just remove this. We'll basically decrement our counter, then just emit that, okay? If I go ahead and actually save that out, then in here, I'll have the increment, the decrement function, hold there. And then instead of this, then what I'll just need to do is just show this value, right? So if I go to my counter, if I click on save, right? So if I click on this button, let me see. So if I click on this button, I can see that I can like increment and decrement, right? So what's the next thing that I can actually do? So in my actual now parent component, when I actually call my actual component, that counter, right? So what I can do is actually now pass it like this, right? So I'll just first need like a variable in here. So I'll just call it counter, and then I'll just initialize it to 0 as well, right? And then in here I'll just say count, right, equals to this counter value. Okay, so now what I can then do here is just also in my parent just show my actual counter value. So what I'm trying to achieve is that if this count, if this counter value changes is my in my actual cloud component, it should also change in my parent component. So if I actually now add this like that, I see that nothing is actually happening, and this is because I'm actually getting like an error, right? So how I can actually now fix this up is this should use my form module. So it's forms module, and then I can go ahead and save and also save that up. Okay, so now let's see what's actually happening, right? So if I actually increment here, you'll see that it's actually changing in my actual child component, and the same thing is actually happening in my parent component, right? So now if I go ahead and reset my counter, right, if I say counter equals to 0, right, so when I actually now reset this, if I go ahead and let's say that if I click this, this should basically reset my counter, right? So now I want to show you like the newer way of actually implementing this, right? So it's very easy, right? So we'll just scrap out all this code, right? And then we'll just use this model. And then we can, if you want to pass in like the type to say this is a number, and then just give it 0. And basically this is all that we need over there, right? So we can give it that, and then now instead of us doing all those funny things, right, so what we can do is basically say counter. So count.set, we can set that value like that. So we can just use this dot. Okay, right. And then if we do want to decrement, then we can just basically use that knowledge, this right? Okay, so basically that's what we need. But now this is actually now a signal. So what we basically need to do is actually pass it as a function because that is actually a signal. Okay, so now if I go ahead and do this, should be getting like some sort of like a change over there. I just maybe close some stuff. Okay, I should be getting a change. So if I now increment this, you'll see that it's actually now changing basically here and there, right? So what I'll then need to also now take into consideration is that we can then basically change this up because this newer way also works with signals, right? So we can actually change that to use a signal, right? And just basically pass it like that. And then instead of us having that counter like that, because now it's a signal, then we just need to pass it as a function, right? And then if we want to reset our counter, we can just use that signals.set. And basically that's it, right? So if you then go ahead and now do that, it's still basically going to be doing the same thing. If I reset, it's going to reset it to 0. So now you can actually see the amount of code that we don't need to type out, right? So in this single line of code, right, we can just basically have a setup of our actual two-way binding, right? And then because we know that it's actually using signals, then we can just either set no update, right? And then if a change happens in our actual child component, the same thing is just gonna basically happen in our parent component. And that's what we've actually seen over here. So yeah, so this is basically how this newer method works. So if you're new to the channel and you like this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.